My name is Keith Maitland. I have two films at the festival this year. I have a documentary called Tower, which tells the story of the first mass American school shooting in Austin, Texas in 1966. And I have a music documentary called A Song for You, which is the Austin City Limits story. So that tells the story of 40 years of live music on America's longest running TV show, America's longest running live music TV show, Austin City Limits.
Okay, so let's talk about Tower first. I mean, that's such a complex story, and tell me about how did you approach that? I mean, there's probably so much information, so many years have passed. What was the story that you wanted to tell?
Well, it has been a long time since the Tower shooting. This is the 50th anniversary this year, and so when I started 4 years ago in the film, I really wanted to tell the story in a way that people could relate to those who went through that experience. And so our goal was to tell the stories of the witnesses, victims, and survivors and heroes from that day. Every other approach to the story that I'd seen had always focused on the sniper, and we wanted to take the opposite approach. We wanted to tell the story from the ground up. So the people who found themselves in the crosshairs, who had no idea what was going on, their moments of realization, their reactions, and the long-term effects of living through the shooting was our goal.
And how many people did you end up following?
Well, it's an ensemble piece, and the film follows 8 main characters, but we interviewed over 36 people in the process of narrowing that story down and just researching and learning about it. And because there were literally thousands of eyewitnesses on campus for the shooting, people still come up to me and say, I was there that day, and they have a detail or an interesting perspective to share. So because of that, we continue to interview people, even though the film is done, and we've been collecting a pretty massive oral history of the entire event from multiple perspectives.
So tell me about some of these people. I mean, what are they doing now, and were they easy to approach, or I assume maybe some of them were a little traumatized by the experience and maybe didn't want to talk about it? What was that? What were they like?
Sure. I mean, being a documentary filmmaker, you're often approaching regular people and trying to ask them to participate in the telling of a story. In this instance, it's a very traumatic story, and it was a long time ago. So we had kind of like the dual difficulty of tracking down people. We had lists of those who had been shot, those who had been witnesses who had been interviewed 50 years ago. So we had some names to start with. And as we tracked people down, our goal was to be sensitive and to let them know that we planned to do a thoughtful telling of the story and that we saw value in it for a new generation of viewers, high school kids and college kids who live under the threat of school violence. But we also knew that yes, some people would be averse to revisiting this history, and we were really careful to make sure that they understood that nobody had to participate, nobody had to talk to us. But literally, of the dozens and dozens of people that we connected with, there were only 2 that said, I don't want to talk about that, I'm not interested. And of course we respected those individuals and left them alone.
As far as like getting information, did you have to go through maybe like law enforcement, or what was the research process like? Was there were any doors shut to you?
Well, fortunately for me, there is a significant archive of all of the police reports and newspaper articles that came out in the months after the Tower shooting in August of '66. So there are several archives available down in Austin at the Austin History Center, and there's one very significant book written on the subject that's well researched and has a lot of footnotes. So it gave me a lot of jumping off point. But my goal was really initially just to learn everything I could about the shooting, so that when we started production, I had all of that information inside of me. But our telling is really a humanistic approach, and so it's about people and their memories and their emotions and their feelings. And so while it's really important to have all of those facts and police reports and journalistic takes inside of me to do my job well, mostly what I wanted to do was go in with open ears and open eyes and spend time with the people who'd lived through it, really getting into how they felt about it.
And you said it was the 50th anniversary, but it's so relevant to what you were talking about earlier. It's so relevant to what's going on today and all the mass shootings. I mean, that really was the first big, mass shooting. So how do you kind of, is there any point in the documentary where you kind of connect to what is going on today?
Well, I think audiences really from the opening minutes of the film are doing that themselves. It's impossible to see the scenes that unfold in Tower and not think of Columbine and Newtown and Aurora and what might be happening, in the next weeks or months, because it just seems like every time we turn on the TV, there's a new story. So our goal wasn't to belabor that point. We thought that there was a lot of subtext that would bring audiences to that point. There is a moment in the film that crosses into today and makes recognition of the connections between those. But again, because our film isn't about policy and it's not about experts or pundits' opinions on guns or violence or mental health, it's about people who lived through it and their feelings, trying to communicate that to people in the audience who maybe haven't lived through it but are just as frustrated by the concept and just as frustrated by the prevalence of it. We didn't have to draw a hard line connecting the dots between then and today, because it's understood.
Yeah. So was there anything that surprised you? Any interviews that you did that kind of stick out in your mind?
Yeah, I think just about every interview contained surprising moments. The biggest refrain that I heard from everybody who was involved, there were two things that almost everybody universally said, which was that they never talked about it with anybody. The people in their family, their friends, people who knew that these individuals had lived through this, didn't want to engage them on it. It was a different time.
Yeah.
And so there was no counseling. The university didn't offer services for those individuals. And in most cases, time and time again, people said, we just didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about it with anybody.
Yeah.
And so that was surprising, because we live in a culture today where I think we recognize the value.
It would have been tweeted and put on Facebook as soon as it
Yeah.
as it happened.
And then the other surprise, I guess, was the fact that the University of Texas didn't have a memorial to the victims all these years. And that was the other thing that I heard specifically from the students, the survivors who were students at the time, who then went to the university. A lot of them were freshmen, the people we talked with. So they were at the university for 3 or 4 more years. And some of them live in Austin and go back to the university frequently. And they said, it really bothers them to walk on campus and to know that there's no memorial that honors those that were lost that day. And through the process of making the film, what was very exciting for me is that a lot of the people we interviewed who had never really spent time together or even met got together.
Oh.
And together they propositioned the university and requested a formal memorial, and the university said yes. So this August 1st, the university will be putting in a memorial on the 50th anniversary of the shooting. And that was a huge surprise to me. It was a surprise that there wasn't a memorial. It was a surprise that the people that we were working with all rallied together to do this. And it was a surprise that the university said yes as easily as they did.
And it's a testament to the work that you were doing, that it took so long, but your film kind of got them together to do that. That's amazing.
Yeah, I take a small amount of pride in that. I give them all the credit for having the idea and following through on it. But it is exciting to know that the film has made some individual impact on the lives of the people who were in the film. And of course, our greater goal is to make impact on the lives of audiences out there.
Definitely. So let's talk about Austin City Limits.
Sure.
That's another kind of monster to tackle. I mean, so many years of that show, so many great artists that have, that have been on that stage. Where do you start with that?
Yeah, the thing about Austin City Limits is, because it's a music show, everybody has their own opinion on what makes great music. It's actually I think it's the most subjective aesthetic form that there is. We all know people who love music that we love and love music that we can't stand. It's just, it's super subjective. So going into 40 years of this incredible you know, performance space, performance history, and narrowing down between the 800 performers who have graced those stages. Yeah, it is a daunting task, but there's the easy answer to your question, where do you start, is you start at the beginning. And for someone like me who loves Willie Nelson, that was pretty easy because Willie Nelson kicked off the show in the fall of '74 with the pilot performance. And I am really a big Willie Nelson fan, and I've seen him a couple dozen times live myself and seen a bunch of his movies and stuff, but I had never seen this Austin City Limits pilot performance before starting this project, and it really blew me away. Willie's like 39 or 40 years old when he took the stage for the pilot, and we know all the songs. Well, if you're a fan, you know all the songs,
Yeah.
but they sound different than the way that I've ever heard them before. He's kind of in a sweet spot in that mid 70s, really before he becomes a household name.
Yeah.
And so we started there, and then from there on, then it was a twisting and turning subjective course through a combination of my favorite musicians of the last 40 years and input from my editor and producers and the producers of the show. But it was funny because for my first meeting with the producers of the show, I asked them each to make a list of their favorite performances, and I worked on the project for over 2 years, and every time I saw them after that, it was like, hey, I want to get that list from you. And they would never narrow it down. And finally, what I came to realize is, at least for executive producer Terry Lacona, who's kind of the subject of the film, I'm pretty sure his favorite performance is whatever's next. And that's what makes a show like that relevant. That's what allows them the longevity of 40 years, because he doesn't look back. He's looking forward.
Yeah.
And so we came in to look back for them.
And I mean, it's so wonderful. People think of Texas and they think of like cowboy hats and and whatever, but people around the world respect that so much. Musicians, they want to be on Austin City Limits, and I've seen the interviews that they do with artists, and you have people from like these obscure countries that are like, this was my dream to be in Austin City Limits.
Yeah.
How did you get access to all that? I mean, how did you get so lucky?
Yeah, well, I was really fortunate to get the opportunity to make this film. It wasn't my idea to make this film. It was the producers of Austin City Limits recognized they were coming up on their 40th anniversary, and it seemed like a good time to honor the past. They did a search for an independent filmmaker who would come in and bring their own vision. And so I was one of many who came in, and my proposal was to focus on the past, the present, and the future. And really, it's because the past is obvious. There's a ton of great history. The only question is how much to include. But the present of the show, the making of the 40th season, was something I really wanted to get into, because I really thought audiences out there would appreciate a look behind the curtain, that a kind of a backstage pass to what it is, what is happening right now at Austin City Limits. And the future, just where is the show going? Yeah. And so through that process, I was fortunate to be able to basically interview a lot of the artists that they had booked for the 40th season, and a lot of artists that passed through Austin. We have a great live music scene in Austin, and so many artists come through all the time. And we would just get contact information from the show's producers for artist management. And to be honest with you, leading off a sentence saying, we're working with Austin City Limits to tell the story of America's great musical legacy, and we'd like you to be a part of it, opened a lot of doors. So we were able to interview Jeff Bridges and Bonnie Raitt and Willie and so many incredible artists, Emmylou Harris and Lyle Lovett. And then we got out of kind of classic country and into some more modern music. We interviewed Wilco and Beck and Pixies, and then some great young up and coming artists like Shaky Graves and White Denim and St. Vincent, Carrie Rodriguez.
Yeah.
So we interviewed about 50 artists for the film, and it's been one of the greatest gifts to me as a filmmaker, because I get to meet all these wonderful artists. And for the most part, we're talking to them not about themselves, but about other artists. That was kind of our approach. As we said, Austin City Limits is like a continuum of music, and every artist that plays the show started as a fan at some point. and they have their influences that help drive them to the place that they were creating. And so rather than talking to Wilco about what it is to be Wilco, we talked to Jeff Tweedy about Neil Young and Leonard Cohen and Dolly Parton. We talked to Willie Nelson about Bob Wills. And we talked to White Denim about Willie Nelson and Stevie Ray Vaughan. So it was just, it was a great way to have a conversation with these great artists. And it kind of equalized us a little bit because it said, yes, I admire the music of White Denim, but we both admire Willie Nelson. And so that makes us both fans. Let's talk about Willie for a little while.
And as far as, so all the research that you did, when did the show start getting popular? When did it really, in your opinion, when did it kind of take off?
Well, that's hard to say. The show was an immediate success in that they were able to get national distribution, which for a small PBS station out of Austin, at a time when Austin was really only a town of about 250,000 people, that was a big coup for KLRU to get this, what could be considered a local music show, to be considered a national music show. And a lot of people in Austin really credit Austin City Limits as spreading just even the name Austin as a town, nationwide. But through the years, really through the late 70s, there were some significant kind of hallmark performances that raised the profile of the show. Two of the biggest ones would be Tom Waits in '79, who was not a very known musical commodity necessarily, but he was so different than what the show had established itself as, is that it showed that the show could go new directions. And then they followed up shortly after that with Ray Charles, who absolutely was, a superstar by then, and he was the biggest act to have played the show to date. And that performance, which is featured in the film, really kind of opened the doors. After that, you've got just incredible Roy Orbison and Jerry Lee Lewis and B.B. King, and so many of the great legends of rock, country, blues, they started coming to the show. And so that's what the show has really juggled so well, is mixing new up and coming artists with legendary performers, and giving them a platform to play music commercial free, uninterrupted, for 30 minutes or an hour. And so it's what makes it an incredible and unique, music program. Yeah,
because it could, it still has that kind of small, independent feel, even though it's such a big deal. So they've been able to keep that independent spirit, even though, it's such a big deal, and all these artists have been on that stage. So that's incredible. Yeah. So, is there anything that you're working on now that you're done with these documentaries?
Well, we're done producing these documentaries, but distribution still lies ahead of us. So we're really hoping to see Tower in movie theaters after the 50th anniversary in August, and then Tower will go on to play on Independent Lens on PBS either later in the year or early next year. And then with Austin City Limits, A Song for You is the name of that film. We're excited to take it out to festivals. We're still looking for a home. It does not have a deal at PBS yet, but I'm hopeful that we'll see that performance based film on TV. And then I'm kind of dipping my toes into a couple more projects, but because they take about 4 years for me to put them together and complete them, I'm careful about what I choose.
Yeah. Okay, well, congratulations, and thank you for talking to us.
Thank you, Liz.